Hi everyone, Rabbi David Towel here. Welcome back to our study of Mishnayot Masechet Berachot, Perek Zayin. We are going to do the final two Mishnayot of this chapter, Mishnayot Dalid and He today. Mishnayot Dalid and He conclude the laws of Zimmun, which has been the central theme of the seventh Perek. Mishnah Dalid talks about the Hiyuv of Zimmun once three people are together and how they cannot break apart and recite Birkat HaMazon individually without Zimmun once they have an obligation to say Zimmun together. Shalosha she'achlu ke'ehad, three people who ate together in unison, bread, and are obligated in Zimmun, enam rasha'im lehalek, they may not separate from each other and make Birkat HaMazon individually without a Zimmun. As Bartenura says, mikevan shehala alehem chovat Zimmun, since the obligation for Zimmun has come upon them. Now, in the case of three people, it is particularly damaging when one separates, because not only is the one who separated not going to do Zimmun and fulfill his own obligation, but he's also ruining the obligation for the other two people who can now not perform Zimmun because they're less than three. And Zimmun must be done with at least three people. But the Mishnah continues to teach us v'chen arba'a v'chen hamisha, that even with 4 or 5, it is also prohibited for anybody to break away from the Zimmun, not necessarily because they will ruin the Zimmun for the others, because they may still have 3 people remaining, but because they themselves are obligated to say Zimmun, and by separating and making Birkat HaMazon alone, they are not fulfilling their obligation. However, once they reach Shisha, says the Mishnah, Nehelakim, then they are able to separate, because 6 people could separate theoretically into 2 separate Zimuns of 3 and 3, and they would fulfill their obligation equally. Ad asara, and this can be done until 10 people. So whether there's 6, they could split into 2, 7 and 8 can split into 2, 3 and 4 and 4 and 4, or 5 and 3, however you want to make the combination. And 9 could even split into 3 sets of 3, could even split into 3 different zimunim. But once you reach 10, now the dynamic changes. Because as the Mishnah says, va'asara enan nehelakim, once there's 10 people, they may not separate from each other. Because 10 people creates a new obligation, not only a chovat zimun, but also chovat zimun b'shem Hashem. As Rabbeinu Ovadia points out, he says, they're now obligated to say zimun with Hashem's name. So if a zimun of 10 breaks into 5 and 5, or 6 and 4, or 7 and 3, or however you want to divide it up, while they may be saying zimun, they cannot say zimun with Shem Hashem in less than 10. So once they reach 10, they reach that platform where they can no longer separate because they have to discharge their obligation of zimun with Shem Hashem. Ad shiyu esrim, says the Mishnah, until they reach 20, in which case they could separate into 2 zimunim of 10, each one with Haskarat Hashem. And this is further proof that from the previous Mishnah, where posek that the zimun does not change once you get beyond 10 people, no matter what, you can continue to break up in any way you want, as long as you're continuing to say Zimun with Shem Hashem. So the key takeaways of this Mishnah are that a person, once they're obligated in Zimun, must say Zimun. They may not separate. They may not ruin the Zimun for others. And once a person has a Zimun b'Shem Hashem or a Zimun without Shem Hashem, they cannot separate and not fulfill that obligation which they had. Let's move to Mishnah He, the final Mishnah of the chapter, wraps up the laws of Zimun. 2 groups of people who were eating in Bayit Ehad. Bayit Ehad over here means one house. Bizman shemikzatam ro'im elu et elu. As long as they could see each other, they may be in separate rooms, but as long as they could see each other, hare elu mitztarfim lezimun. They can be considered a combination to recite one zimun on behalf of everybody. Ve'im lav, but if they cannot see each other, elu mizaminim la'atzmam ve'elu mizaminim la'atzmam. Each group is going to perform zimun separately, and they may not combine. This may have a ramification whether or not you have a zimun b'shem Hashem or not. So, for example, if there's 5 people in one room and 5 people in another room, if we can combine them together because ro'im elu et elu, then we can have zimun b'shem Hashem. If they cannot see each other, we cannot combine them, and then we would have to have 2 separate zimunim of less than 10 people. Bartenura adds in that there's another way to be mitzaref otam that's not mentioned in the Mishnah, and that is through a shamash, through a server. He says, "Ubizman sheshamash ehad mishamesh l'shtei haburot." At a time when the server is serving between the 2 groups, but he's going back and forth like a waiter. Afal pi she'en ro'im elu et elu, even if they're not seeing each other, hashamash mitzarefam. then the shamash will combine them so that they can make one zimun. Now, it's worth noting that all of this is assuming that there isn't a clear intention for them to be considered separate. However, if you have people who may be seeing each other but are known to be separate, their intention when they sit down is to be separate, then they cannot be combined in a zimun. So, for example, if you have people who go to a restaurant to eat dinner, each table, although they could see each other very well, the assumption is that they're sitting down at that table with only their group of people and are only connected and talking to their group of people. They cannot stand up then and do a zimun with the entire dining hall, whom their also intention is not to be included with any of the other tables. So if there's explicit kavanah not to be included, then no matter how much they're seeing each other or the waiter is combining them, they're not going to be mitzdaref. Our Mishnah is talking about a situation when they sat down status quo, like at a sebit or something, not to separate and not to be together, that then they will be included with each other if they can see each other or the shamash is mitzaref for them. Final note, the Mishnah records over here, not necessarily having to do with zimun, but having to do with the laws of wine, which will lead us into the next chapter, but also are important to know for Birkat HaMazon, because often Birkat HaMazon is made on a cup of wine. The Mishnah says, "En mevarchim ala yain ad sheyiten letocho mayim." One may not make a beracha on wine, meaning the normal beracha of borei pri hagefen, ad sheyiten letocho mayim, until they dilute it with water. Says Baratenura that in those days, haya yenam hazak me'od, their wine was very, very strong. They made it almost from concentrate. Velo haya ra'ui l'shtiyah, it was not worthy for being drank. Velo mayim, without water. Helkach akate lo ishtane lema'aliyuta. Therefore, the syrupy concentrated wine is not considered this high-level quality product that the rabbis established borei pri hagefen upon. Velo zaz mi birchato harishona, and will not move from its original beracha. Umivarchim alav borei pri ha'etz ka'anavim, and it's almost going to get the same status of grapes themselves, and you're going to make the beracha of borei pri ha'etz. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. However, Baratenura points out en halacha ke Rabbi Eliezer. Rather, the halacha here follows the hachamim. The hachamim omrim mevarechim. Hachamim say even concentrated wine still has the name wine and can be made borei pri hagefen. It may not be the normal, typical, best way to drink it. Normally, you would have to dilute it, but it still receives the beracha of borei pri hagefen. The Gemara says because they use concentrated wine without diluting it, sometimes in recipes and ingredients mixed with honey and other things like that, and therefore it retains its beracha of borei pri hagefen. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.